The cursor blinked against the white void of the screen, a steady, mocking rhythm. Mark stared until the edges of his vision blurred. He reached out and slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing sharp against the quiet room. He pressed his palms into his eyes, rubbing his temples until spots danced in the dark. For hours, the same cycle had repeated. A task left unfinished, a mind spiraling into doubt, a growing weight in his chest. He pulled his hand away and looked at the stack of stationery near his mouse. He grabbed a pen, his movements stiff, and snatched a yellow sticky note from the pad. He wrote in sharp, deliberate strokes, "I am capable of solving this problem." He stared at the ink for a second, feeling the sudden quiet pulse of the room. He peeled the backing and pressed the note firmly onto the corner of his monitor. It was a small square of paper, but it caught the light, standing out against the dark plastic. Mark exhaled, his shoulders dropping an inch. The loop of negative thoughts slowed, hitching, then finally breaking. He sat back, his eyes fixed on the message, and for the first time that day, the pressure behind his eyes began to recede. Mark watched the yellow square. It was not magic, but it was a tool. He understood now that he was not just writing words, he was rewiring his own focus. By repeating a simple statement, he could pull his brain out of a state of deficit and into a state of possibility. He sat up, pushing the chair back, and thought about the other loops that held him back. Take his diet, for instance. For weeks, he had treated every meal like a battle, a series of restrictions that felt like punishment. He caught himself thinking, "I will stop eating junk food," and immediately corrected it. He whispered to the empty room, "I choose nourishing foods that fuel my body." The tone was different. The weight of it was different. He was no longer denying himself. He was making a choice for his health. He felt the tension in his stomach loosen. This was the shift. By changing the language of his internal monologue, the task ahead no longer felt like an impossible burden. He was not just surviving the day, he was directing it. He looked back at the screen, the cursor now a guide rather than a threat, and felt the clarity settle in like a steady, quiet foundation. The test of his resolve arrived in the kitchen. A sharp disagreement sparked, the air thick with rising irritation. Mark felt the familiar heat climb up his neck, his jaw locking tight as the impulse to argue took hold. He wanted to interrupt, to fire back a sharp, defensive retort that would win the point but lose the person. He felt the words crowding his throat, ready to spill out in a blur of frustration. Then, he remembered the anchor. He caught his reflection in the window and forced a hard, deliberate exhale. He repeated the words internally, "I am present, and I listen to understand." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. He held his tongue, his hands balled into fists, resisting the urge to speak over the other person. He watched the other's face, really watched, letting the words land instead of batting them away. The pause stretched, an agonizing gap in the rhythm of the argument. But as the seconds ticked by, the defensive wall he had built began to crack. He processed the actual intent behind the other's words. The tension did not vanish, but it shifted, replaced by a strange, quiet clarity that finally allowed for a real connection. The temptation hit like a physical weight, pulling him toward the old destructive patterns. His hands shook, and the room seemed to narrow. He felt the familiar dark urge clawing at his focus, demanding he give in to the spiral. He gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white, his breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. The silence of the room amplified the mental noise. He needed an anchor. He forced his jaw open, his voice raspy and thin at first, before finding the strength to project it. "I am stronger than my cravings, and this moment will pass." The sound of his own voice cut through the static vibrating in his chest. He said it again, louder, more deliberate. The air in the room felt different. He watched his reflection in the dark screen, repeating the phrase until the shaking in his hands began to subside. When a setback threatened to pull him back under, he did not fight the reality of the failure. He acknowledged it and countered immediately. "I am learning, and I am growing." He kept his eyes locked on the monitor, refusing to look away from his own words. He was no longer a victim of his impulses. He was the architect of his own response. The urge, once a towering wall, now felt like a receding tide. He stood his ground, letting the echoes of his own conviction fill the quiet space. The crisis had passed, but the work remained. Mark stood up, walked to his desk, and pulled a fresh pad of paper from the drawer. He chose his 3 anchors with precision. One for his work, one for his health, and one for his peace of mind. He wrote them down in bold, clear strokes. The ink felt permanent against the page. He moved through the room, placing the notes where they would serve as constant reminders. One on the bathroom mirror, one on his phone lock screen, and the final one directly above his keyboard. These were no longer just words. They were a roadmap for his focus. He spoke them aloud, once for each, testing the weight of the commands. He felt the shift in his posture as he claimed authority over his own mental landscape. Tomorrow, he would wake up and read them before the day could dictate its own terms. He would say them when the pressure rose and when the world felt too loud. Consistency was not a destination. It was the daily practice of choosing what to believe. He sat back down and looked at the screen. The blank space no longer felt like an obstacle, but a canvas. He took a deep, steady breath, looked at the note on his monitor, and began to type. He was in command. He was moving forward, and he was starting right now.